Welcome to Cyber Protection Magazine, and today we're going to talk about ransomware with Gijsbert Janssen from Zerto. He's going to dive a little bit into the topic. And Gijsbert, it seems that successful ransomware attacks are becoming increasingly common and popular. Are we in a situation where organizations should be switching their focus from prevention more to a recovery approach?
I would say, unfortunately, yes. And I think the headlines speak for themselves. It seems nobody is safe anymore, whether it's even tech companies nowadays get attacked, but also very critical services for like the continuation of a country, like colonial pipelines, for example. A simple Google on ransomware and attack will get you hundreds more examples of ransomware attacks that were successful. And that's something we see more and more. And honestly, with ransomware attacks happening every second, it's very hard to protect yourself. It's very hard to prevent them. So yes, I think recovery needs to be an essential component of how we look at ransomware and how we prepare ourselves for ransomware.
Okay, but presumably, I think most organizations, at least they should have, a backup solution in place. Why are ransomware attacks still successful? Why do they have to pay ransomware or ransom?
But actually, there's multiple reasons. One is ransomware is getting very sophisticated. Ransomware nowadays, there are examples where they specifically attack backup solutions first, trying to disable access for users to actually perform restores, encrypt the backups themselves or delete them. So they're getting really sophisticated. And besides that, it's also how much data loss can an organization accept? Because if, for example, the ransomware attack happens just a minute before my nightly backup happens, that means if I need to restore, I'm losing up to 24 hours of data. Is that acceptable for an organization? Is actually losing 24 hours of data more expensive than paying the ransom? So there are many factors in play, but I think the most important one is, can I suffer data loss? If not, maybe then I'll have to pay. Is my backup solution compromised? I can't even recover. So there is no option. Do I want to stop my business, or do I want to pay the ransom and get that encryption key? If you get the encryption key, that's also a question mark, because there are examples of organizations paying ransom and not getting the decryption key, and having to pay another ransom. So it's a very tough situation to be in. So I think the focus on how you recover and how you prevent it is definitely something any organization should have.
Yes, and I think there's also a different approach sometimes from the criminals, because while they will encrypt your data, they might also copy it and then threaten to sell it on the darknet. So, a backup solution won't even really help there. How can that be challenged, so to speak?
So absolutely, like I said, sophistication and how they use your data, whether they encrypt it on site or indeed encrypt it and copy it somewhere else, threatening to release all kinds of sensitive information. And it's a multi-step approach. It's you, besides making sure you can recover, besides trying to prevent the actual infection first. There's also something like what we call data leakage prevention, DLP. And you see a lot of security vendors really focusing on that right now. It's preventing data from being leaked outside of your infrastructure. So it's, if you look at the different frameworks, and I think the NIST framework is a very, very important one. and that gives you the guidelines that you need when looking at and developing your own framework around that. Is there's multiple steps. Recovery is one of them. That's where we excel. But there's prevention, there's detection, there's so many things around it that you need to do and need to prepare yourself for as an organization.
That's a good keyword, actually. So what can organizations, besides following the NIST framework or following all steps of the NIST framework, what can they do differently to protect against those changing nature of ransomware?
I think one of the first steps is accepting that it can actually hit you, and prepare yourself for that. I think a fairly recent, newer term for that is cyber resilient, being cyber resilient, which means, okay, I've got everything in place, but I also have a plan in place for when it actually hits me. So that's more about preparing for a ransomware attack, and also making sure that you are ready to respond to a ransomware attack. And that could be both from a public statement, which according to some of the GDPR regulations, you'll have to do. It's a mandatory thing, but also ensuring that you can respond from a recovery perspective. Now, there are so many things, best practices available for infrastructure. I hammer on isolation. Ensure that every single component, from an IT management perspective, operation perspective, end user perspective, isolate as much as you can. Make sure that if one piece gets attacked, it's isolated to that piece. It's the more failure domains you have, the more you're spreading the risk of actually something happening to your environment. And the smaller your risk domains are, the lower the impact is. I think that's a very important thing. And that's whenever we talk to organizations, of course, we focus on recovery. That's our main thing. But we do help them and guide them through this whole complexity of how should I protect my environment. And then I always talk about failure domains, about spreading the risk, about making sure that your failure domains are small, so the risk is the impact is low when an attack happens. And there are many different best practices out there, but make sure that you look at them, and also don't be afraid to talk about it or ask for advice. There are organizations out there that maybe faced a ransomware attack in a similar vertical that are open to help you, to give you advice. You don't have to do this by yourself. I definitely make sure that talk about this with other organizations as well, to learn from them, because there's still a lot we need to learn. There's still not a lot we need to do. And there's a lot of knowledge out there.
That's definitely isolating. I think it's a very good idea. As difficult as it might be. You also, or there's also, you mentioned the question of, you have a backup and a minute before that the ransomware attack hits you. What about continuous data protection? Is that something which is important in defending against cyber or ransomware attacks?
I think having the word continuous in your data protection is critical. Data loss, as I mentioned before, is becoming more and more unacceptable. Where, let's say 10 years ago, you ask someone else, so what if you lose 24 hours of data? So, well, it's not great, but we'll probably survive, or maybe 15 years ago. And because one, they are used to cope with that, because that's what backups are built for. That's how backups are designed nowadays, or backup solutions are designed. It's like every night, because no one's working at night, I'll bother my production systems. I'll impact their performance just to make sure that I can get a copy of that data. Now, as data grew explosively, as data became more and more important, data loss was becoming more and more unacceptable. And that's why continuous protection is becoming more and more important as well. if you read a lot of the reports out there right now, but looking at trends in data protection, CDP is in all of them. And the reason is continuous data protection allows you to, as the word says, continuously protect your data. So instead of having to accept data loss of hours, maybe even days if you run out of luck, you are going back to mere seconds. And combining that with the right technology, things like journal-based recovery, ensuring that one, everything's continuously protected, but also gives you very granular recovery capabilities. So you don't want to go back with hours. No, you can go back in seconds, like really rewinding it, like an old-fashioned VCR, like an old videotape that you had to rewind before you returned it to the Blockbuster or whatever it's called in the different regions. Solutions out there like Zerto give you the ability to actually rewind to merely a few seconds before something happened. And it gives you access back to your data, because I mean, a lot of organizations talk about prevention, detection, you name it. But what if it actually hit you? What's the critical piece? What are you worried about? You're worried about your data. You want to get your data back. You don't want it to be encrypted. You want to be able to access your data, the one of the most important assets of your company. So we are very good at recovering data. And I think continuous data protection is at the core, or should be at the core of every solution out there, to ensure that every change as they happen on your environment gets protected.
How will that work from a technical perspective? Can I imagine that, like, the minute you write something, or the second you write something to the database, it's immediately backed up, or how does that work?
Basically, yes. So at least the way Zerto works in our engine is we look at virtual machines. We protect virtual machines, and virtual machines, they have storage attached to them. As in disks. And a change to a virtual machine is basically a write onto that disk. So what Zerto does is, without any performance impact, we can copy or clone those writes and simply replicate that write to a remote location, to a local location, and store it there. And the way we store it is actually comparable to a database transaction log. So every change that happens to an environment, we store in what we call a journal. And every 5 seconds, we place a pointer in that journal saying, okay, this is a point in time you can recover to. And the only thing you need to do is select that point in time, and we'll rewind everything back to how it was at that point in time, whether it's a file, a VM, or even an entire data center that consists of thousands of VMs. And we can do that into the cloud. We can do it locally. We can do it to a different data center between different type of technology stacks. So that makes it really flexible from a recovery perspective.
How would you see ransomware in the near future? Because I think it's a global problem, but there are no global regulations or solutions to that. How can that work in the future? Can we get rid of ransomware anytime soon?
I'm afraid ransomware is here to stay for a while. I think it's becoming increasingly hard to prevent ransomware, as we can see almost on a daily basis. And they're becoming more and more sophisticated, not only in what they do as a result, right? Encrypting, attacking backup solutions and things like that, but also getting more and more sophisticated into how they get into your environment. If you see some of the emails that are used to infect environments, it's hard to actually distinguish them from like a real email from the bank or a real email from HR talking about your bonus. And they use social engineering to develop those emails. And I think it's only getting more and more sophisticated. So besides all the technical things you can do, I think one of the most important ones is make sure you educate the users of your environment, educate people. And this is not only something that organizations should do. In my opinion, government should help protect people as well, and should inform people as well about all these different types of attacks, and making sure that they recognize them, making sure that they are educated about what the impact can be to, one, an organization, but two, their personal lives as well, because ransomware is not only a thing of organizations, but it can hit you as a person as well. I mean, my girlfriend loves taking pictures. If 80,000 plus pictures are getting encrypted, that's going to be a disaster. And it's ever increasing. And so educate yourself. Make sure that if you are running an organization, educate your employees. For example, Zerto does tests every few days. They send out emails. And if a person clicks a malicious link, they get alerted, they can do a training. So it's a continuous process. Just like you need to continuously protect your data, you need to continuously educate any technology user out there for the organization's benefit, but also for their own personal benefit.
Yeah, absolutely agree. I think educating people and therefore preventing social engineering from happening is crucial to any good cybersecurity strategy. So thanks, Gijsbert Janssen from Zerto. It was good having you. Thanks.
You're welcome. Thanks for having me.